How will we address the climate crisis? Climate One with Greg Dalton brings together advocates, influencers, and policymakers in empowering conversations that connect all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic, the scary and the exciting, to help you understand the most critical issue of our time. Because addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
California has staked much of its reputation on its green credentials, but the Golden State may be falling behind on meeting its ambitious emissions targets. At the same time, the benefits and harms of the clean energy transition may not be distributed evenly. Liane Randolph is chair of the California Air Resources Board. This powerful agency regulates emissions from factories, trucks and cars, dairies, and more. Mary Rose Taruc is Energy Justice Director of the California Environmental Justice Alliance. What role should regulators and community advocates play in ensuring that clean energy plans meet the state's needs? Getting California on track for a just energy transition. Today on Climate One.
At the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, former chair of the California Air Board, Mary Nichols, was on track. A lot of people thought she was going to be the head of the U.S. EPA. But that nomination was derailed by environmental justice advocates who criticized California's emission reduction plans because they focused on low-cost ways to reduce emissions. That focus often thought to be good politics and good economics, low-cost transition. And it meant that refineries could buy offsets in faraway places and not clean up their own communities, such as Richmond, where that are overburdened with pollution. So Mary Rose, now that Liane Randolph is chair of the California Air Board, how would you rate its record on environmental justice?
Wow, starting out big.
Wow, hello.
Let's get right to it, We don't got much time. We got to get to the real thing, We got to go quick on climate.
Conversation, right? Yeah. So, as one of the directors at the California Environmental Justice Alliance, our relationship to climate solutions is about environmental justice, and it isn't just about greenhouse gases, but the communities that are impacted by the climate pollution. And so it was a struggle with the previous CARB chair to integrate community realities and the pollution realities into our climate policies and programs. And so I think that's where we butted heads, and we're like, okay, how do we help environmental justice land well inside the agency? And so we now have environmental justice seats on the Air Resources board. We have an environmental justice team inside staff. And so I think when you landed at the Air Resources Board, we had done some work already to help create a better relationship between environmental justice communities and the policies that were coming out of our climate agency, the Air Resources Board. And so I think I and many organizations in the environmental justice movement appreciate the more collaborative effort and the spirit that you've brought into the agency, and I think it's going better, the relationship that we had with the last chair.
So Liane, that's meaningful. How do you balance that low cost, which is really an issue these days, the cost of this transition, and we'll get to that, with protecting the people who are historically marginalized communities? Can we have low costs and just transition? How do you balance those values?
I think it's important to recognize that it's not just about low cost. It's really about making sure that this transition is affordable and accessible to everyone. And people like Mary Rose, who've been working for decades, representing communities that are completely left out of the conversation, we have really tried to be as mindful as possible that we need to make sure that this transition is more available. So one of the ways we've done that, for instance, is reorienting our incentive programs so that they are not just available to everyone, but instead are targeted to low-income residents or communities that wouldn't otherwise have access to the technology. So that's just sort of one small way where we can pursue some of the same strategies, but do it in a way where we make it more accessible to communities.
Liane, researchers at the group Next 10 calculated that the state has reduced emissions on average about 1.5% a year between 2010 and 2021. And to reach our 2030 goals, we'd have to reduce emissions by 4.5% a year, basically 3x from what we've done so far. We've already done the easy stuff, right? We've done the, now the harder stuff comes. So how can we multiply by 3x emission reductions when we're getting to the harder work?
Well, one of our responsibilities at CARB is to adopt the climate change scoping plan that gets updated every 5 years. And when we did our most recent update at the end of 2022, we were really clear that here's the suite of strategies, here are the things that need to happen, but unless they actually happen and unless the deployment happens, we will not reach our goals. So deployment is absolutely critical. We need the renewable energy that is going to support the transition to move as much as we can to electricity. Our market-based programs that mentioned earlier need to get more stringent. We are working on that right now. We are looking at both our low carbon fuel standard program and our cap and trade program, looking at how they can achieve more reductions. And we are continuing to consider our regulatory strategies. One thing that's important to recognize is that it's not just about the market-based programs. It's about the critical regulations that drive emissions reductions. It's about advanced clean cars too. 100% new car sales, zero emission by 2035. It's about advanced clean trucks and advanced clean fleets. Those rules together will transition the heavy-duty sector to zero emission by 2045, with new sales being zero emission by 2036. And it's those rules that will really benefit communities that live along freeways, that live near ports, that live near the incredibly growing warehouse industry.
Let me jump in there. Truckers say they can't afford it. Truckers say that electric truck, and I saw electric trucks driving to the LA recently. I was like, so excited. There they are, electric trucks on the road.
They're there.
Right? And they cost double of a diesel truck.
Right.
And so sounds great, but you know, unless you're going to pay truckers a bunch of money, $250,000 to buy a truck that they could buy for $125,000, how's it going to happen?
Few things I would say. First of all, the costs will continue to go down. We are already seeing reductions in battery prices as we anticipated when we adopted the rule and considered the rates of adoption. That battery technology will continue to reduce in price. Incentives do help. The total cost of ownership is a really important conversation to have with people who are buying these trucks. You know, you have a higher upfront cost, but you have lower maintenance costs and lower charging costs, or lower fueling costs, I should say. So, you know, this is not a transition that's going to happen overnight, and it's really about the trends, and those trends aren't necessarily linear. You know, you will have some sectors that have breakthroughs and move forward, and then other sectors that are maybe going slower than you think they're going to go. The key is that we keep moving forward with all of our strategies and we get the rules in place that ensure that the companies and industries will be making the transition and will continue to move forward. And I'm just going to say one more thing about that, which is the incredible support from the federal government. When we adopted our scoping plan, we did not model in the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure and Jobs Act because they were brand new and we didn't have time to put it into our modeling. So the way I think of those laws is they put wind in our sails. You know, we had a plan. We could show that that plan would reduce greenhouse gas emissions and still sustain a strong economy. And now we have even more support. And so that support from the federal government will also really help. They have heavy-duty vehicle incentives as well.
Mary Rose, most people who receive Amazon packages, come to the Commonwealth Club, listen to this show, don't live in a diesel death corridor or near a port or near a warehouse where there's a lot of concentration of diesel trucks. So tell us how important this getting away from diesel, which has many carcinogens, creates all sorts of health problems. How important is this?
If my kids live next to the freeway and I'm spending multiple times a year taking them to the emergency room for exacerbated asthma, like what is the cost of like your child's health? Those are the types of ways that we approach these climate and environmental policies from environmental justice communities is from our health, the health of our families. And so what will it cost for us to change our ways, the polluting economy that we belong to? Like sometimes it does feel like really big to make that change and that transition. But here we are actually integrating our health ideas into climate and environmental policy. And this is why when we say we have to move from those diesel trucks, it's not just good for environmental justice communities, it's good for everybody when we reduce the pollution coming out of diesel trucks. And it's not that we don't have the technologies or the solutions for that, or even the money. There's a lot of free money, actually, that I will say CARB is giving away to corporations through free allowances through these market mechanisms, and the environmental justice community has actually opposed those kinds of measures or the ways that CARB has designed our climate program and where the funds flow. Like, if anybody needs free money, it's low-income communities. Who's paying too much to PG&E now for skyrocketing electricity rates? Like, we're in San Francisco. We need to actually move funds smartly, especially to the people who need them the most. And when we're talking about affordability, if I'm earning $30,000 a year, that's my affordability for my electricity costs is different than if I'm earning $2 million a year. And so we need to be talking about the economics.
Let's get to electricity affordability. First, I want to have Liane respond to this point that, is CARB handing out corporate welfare through cap and trade?
Well, the allowances are actually the free allowances are set by statute based on the fact that they are, industries are trade exposed. And when the most recent statutory cap and trade update was passed, basically the legislature said, we're going to consider all industries trade exposed. And so, they sort of
so you can't change that, the legislature did it.
Right.
And this goes back to trying to get business on board, not punish them too hard, because we want business to be part of this transition.
It is, it is it's sort of extremely challenging kind of making this transition, because one of the other criticisms we get is, oh, well, if you increase the cost on companies to comply, they raise their prices, they raise their gas prices, they raise their consumer product prices, and that has an impact on affordability as well.
Sure, they pass it through, sure.
They're passing through. So, as a regulatory agency and as an agency sort of trying to figure out how to move the needle on climate through both a regulatory process and through market-based strategies, we're always trying to strike that balance of ensuring that we are continuing to move the transition forward, but recognizing that we have to be mindful of the larger economy, we have to be mindful of the impacts of our rules on the functioning of the economy. And we are legally obligated to do that. For every rule, we have to do an economic analysis that fully accounts for the impacts on the economy. And one of the ways we account for those impacts is by pointing out the public health benefits. Because unfortunately, when you have to do an economic analysis, you have to look at public health benefits not from the perspective of a scared parent in an emergency room on a Saturday night, but from the perspective of how much money is it going to save the healthcare system. And the reality is that it will save money in the healthcare system. And so the larger economy benefits from our regulatory work. And we need to continue to tell that story. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that there are jobs and livelihoods that depend on a strong economy. And so we need to make this transition in a way that helps support those jobs. And I'll just sort of throw out one last little point, which is I think it's really important when companies think about making this transition, or when investors think about investing in new technologies and new companies, that one of the questions they ask is, what kind of jobs are you providing? Are you providing actual full-time jobs with benefits, with reasonable salaries? Or are you doing the venture capital as cheap as possible race to the bottom? I think it's really important that everyone involved in this transition ask themselves that question.
Well, most companies pay their employees as little as possible,
Well,
right?
right.
That's how it works. I want to move on to the affordability of We'll move our affordability and electricity. Mary Rose, California kneecapped rooftop solar, allegedly because the prices paid for rooftop solar sent to the grid was favoring wealthy people. There was sort of this, and leaving out low-income people, there was sort of this bougie bias in rooftop solar. The new program, known as Net Metering 3.0, was supposed to bring rooftop solar to renters and others who could not, had difficulty affording it before. Do you think California's new rooftop solar math is delivering as promised, and why?
Environmental justice communities, millions of people across California want to see clean energy on their rooftops. The thing is, not all of us own our rooftops, right? And so there's a lot, especially from environmental justice communities, most of us are renters. So how do we also make sure that our solar programs are reaching renters? And so the California Environmental Justice Alliance, where I work, we have introduced bills in the legislature and have gotten laws where we're going to dedicate funding for solar on affordable housing. We're going to dedicate funding for and create a program for community solar, so that our community centers, our healthcare centers, other community buildings can also provide that kind of clean energy in the neighborhood. But what's happened with the net energy metering and the rooftop solar redesign is that when communities of color were finally getting in the door to create a more equitable solar program, that's when they cut off the compensation for those who are installing solar. So it happened at the wrong time. I think there needs to be an equitable redesign of net metering, and they need to take into account how to make it equitable.
But that was what this was supposed to do. This was supposed to do that. Are you saying that the Public Utilities Commission that sets these rates is kind of has a history of being pretty cozy with industry? Are you saying they're kind of cozy?
That's right. I mean, so
again, I thought we were supposed to fix that.
Well, which agency is allowing all our skyrocketing rates from the investor-owned utilities?
38% it reads in 3 years.
Who is blocking our community solar program from getting implemented the right way? The CPUC. And so there's a lot that especially the Governor Newsom could do to make the CPUC more responsive to the 99% of Californians in the state. And I think that could, because they're the ones making decisions, and they need to be more accountable to people and less about these private utilities.
You used to be on the Public Utilities Commission, so
I think I can weigh in here. I guess I would say a couple things. So, full disclosure, I voted on NEM 2.0, which was the last sort of
That energy metering.
previous,
2.0.
and at that time, and I said this from the dais, I made it very clear, because the reality is that the NEM program requires utilities to buy electrons that they could buy for dirt cheap from utility facilities and pay a retail rate to individuals who have rooftop solar. And that historically, that program has benefited people like me who could afford to put rooftop solar on their roof, and compensated me for electrons that I didn't need to be compensated for. And the purpose was the right purpose. The purpose was to build a rooftop solar industry and to get it going. The challenge is that the economics of solar have shifted. As I said when I voted on NEM 2.0, this cannot go on forever. The industry has to figure out a way to make its product more attractive, more accessible, without the cost shift to the ratepayers who can't afford to put rooftop solar.
The starting subsidies over, take off the training wheels, you got to put on your big boy pants and survive.
Right. Full disclosure, I have not read the community solar proposed decision that is currently out, so I can't comment on that.
It's bad.
But I just think it's really important to remember that we are trying to make this transition in a way that is as fair and equitable as possible, and things that we used to do, like giving on the hood rebates for people with no regard to income or the MSRP of the vehicle, or providing full compensation, full retail compensation for electrons that could be purchased for much cheaper. That's just not equitable, and we have to move away from that model.
I want to ask a philosophical question. There's a question about, Liane, your relationship, how to approach fossil fuel companies. Some people would say fossil fuel companies are the villains. Let's, slit their throats and do away with them. And others would say, no, tame the beast. Let's lure them into this economy. Let's, encourage them. And hydrogen is a way to do that, right? A lot of the fossil fuel companies and big industrial companies favor hydrogen because it fits into their business model. So are you in the slit the throat or kind of tame the beast kind of approach?
Well, okay, so our scoping plan calls for a 94% reduction in fossil fuel use, right? That is our goal. Our goal is to stop relying on fossil fuels. And so the way we think about that is, for instance, in the hydrogen hub process, the state's application, I'm sorry, not the state, actually, it was Arches who filed the application. That application is for renewable hydrogen. It is for hydrogen produced from renewable energy. And the state is putting a lot of effort into building that market and building that supply so that we don't have to use fossil fuels for hydrogen. So that's one thing I would point out. The second thing is, a lot of the work we do is about reducing the demand for fossil fuels. It is about building that renewable energy. It is about deploying zero-emission appliances. It is about deploying zero-emission trucks, all the way from Class 2 delivery vans up to Class 8 trucks. Even in our most aggressive projections, it takes time to do that. It takes a long time. These vehicles last for 15, 20 years.
Mary Rose, one last question. Something that I think that's been overlooked that happened this year, that's really interesting is, there's a ban on on gasoline-powered lawnmowers, leaf blowers, that sort of thing, which I think that, industry pretty much got on board with pretty quickly. I didn't see the kind of pushback. It's often, immigrants, low-skilled laborers who are using those, those equipment.
Or gardeners, yeah.
Gardener, right? Who are breathing it, et cetera. I know one who's like, I don't like carrying gasoline around in my truck because it smells. I'm breathing the fumes when I'm driving around my leaf blower. The electric ones sound much better than those leaf blowers, gas blowers. How big a deal is that? And are there cost considerations there? Because, again, electric leaf blower costs more than a gasoline one up front.
This is where there's free money from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund polluters that can actually be used as incentives for a transition for especially like workers like our gardeners, our immigrant gardeners, et cetera. And there's money there, and that's where we think, the equitable use of the funds that are in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund could go.
But how many gardeners know how to get money from CARB, right?
This is what we tell CARB is that you need to actually work in the, with communities to do the marketing, because the community-based organizations know where our families who work in these gardens, and we could do a really good job of marketing. So that's kind of the partnership that we have been calling for with CARB and other agencies, is that we're on the ground. We have relationships with the people that you're trying to serve. Let us help co-create these programs. And we're talking leaf blowers, but my main campaign actually out of Ceja is to help retire the 200 gas-fired power plants in the state. Talk about that as a big project that's consequential to our future and how we're going to solve climate change. Is that California is pumped with methane gas, and these 200 power plants all across the state that are harming us. And we are trying to figure out the transition from those dirty power plants into clean energy sources that we can even own. After many years of advocacy, we got a good decision from the CPUC in their long-term planning for gas retirement to actually slash emissions by half in the next 10 years. So imagine 200 power plants in the next 10 years where we're going to get emissions reductions half of that capacity. We want the power plants in environmental justice communities to be retired first.
And we have to wrap it up there. Thank you both. Let's give a round of applause to Liane and Mary Rose.